Hi guys, and welcome back to our channel. Today I'm going to be showing you how to fit an MSS kit to the G80 M3 behind me. Although it is a very simple kit to fit, if you don't feel comfortable doing it yourself at home, we do recommend you take it to a professional garage with experience on fitting suspension parts. So as you can see, we've got the car in the air behind me and we've taken the wheels off already. So I'm going to start off by running through the front suspension and how we go about changing it. So the first thing I'm going to do is undo the sensor on the strut here and disconnect all of the wires that are clipped into the bracket on the shock. Then I will undo the nut for the drop link connecting it to the strut, and I will move that out of the way. Lastly, I'm going to disconnect the level sensor on the bottom that's connected to the lower arm. Once those are undone, I can use my jack to support the hub. Once I've supported the hub, I can move into the engine bay and remove the covers that allow me access to the top mount. Once I've gained access to the top mount, I can remove the center nut for the shock. I will slowly lower the jack to release the pressure from the spring. So now that I've released the pressure with the jack, I can pull the jack out of the way and carefully pull the shock out of the arch, ensuring that none of these lines get stretched, including the brake line. And now I can remove the spring. So with the stock spring removed, I'm now going to remove the stock rubber spring base and replace it with the MSS kit. So the MSS kit consists of the spring, the adjuster that the spring sits on top of, a new bump stop and a new rubber spring seat. So now I'm going to fit the MSS spring base. As you can see, it has been modified because this is a development kit. Once the kit goes into production, it'll be all nicely finished. So you place this over the top of the shock, locating this notch within that gap there, and just use a little bit of force just to press it down. You can use a bit of WD-40 or lubricant if you like, and it might make it a bit easier to seat. With that seated, I can place the adjuster on top, the spring on top of that, the new bump stop, and lastly the stock rubber dust cover. With all of that in place, I can put the shock back in the wheel arch. Place the jack back underneath the hub and line the center of the damper up with the middle of the top mount. If you look from the top and ensure that the damper is coming through the middle of the top mount. Once you can see that started to come through, check again underneath to make sure the spring is seating correctly around the top mount. And when you're happy that it's seated, you can jack it out the rest of the way. Then you can screw the nut on a few threads and using your socket, just wiggle it to make sure it is central, whilst applying a bit more pressure with the jack. Then you can tighten up the center nut, and the rest of the process is basically what you did but in reverse. So with both sides complete, I'm ready to move on to the rear. But before I do that, I'm just going to run through and check that all the lines are clipped into where they're supposed to be, and that all bolts and nuts that I've undone have been tightened back up. Because we've had this kit fitted to the car before, we have already set the height to where we want it, but this is a good time for you to make a rough adjustment of where you want the spring to seat. So moving on to the rear, again, it's a fairly simple procedure. You've got two bolts to undo. One is on the bottom of the shock and one is on the inner side of the lower arm. You will need a jack or a gearbox stand to support the bottom of the lower arm while you take these bolts out. Otherwise, the tension of the spring will push the arm downwards. The passenger side has got a level sensor, the same as the front, but the driver's side doesn't. So just be wary of that when you're changing the passenger side. So now that both of those bolts are removed, you can lower your support slowly and just pull the arm down that little bit to get the spring out. So now that I've removed the stock spring on the rear, I can fit the MSS kit. Unlike the front spring, the MSS reuses the OE rubbers, top and bottom. So all I have to do is remove them from the stock spring and fit them onto the MSS. This is the bottom one. And this is the top one. Once that's in the car, the orange spring will sit on top of the adjuster, and then they'll all sit as one stack. Now, because we have had this kit fitted to our car previously, we've already set the adjuster to where we want it to be. The same with the front, but before you fit the kit, it's a good idea to get this to roughly where you want it, because it's a lot more difficult to adjust on the car. The front is easy enough to adjust on the car, but because the rear is under a lot of tension, it is sometimes easier to remove the spring again, move the adjuster to where you want it, and then refit it. So now we can fit the MSS spring. I'll start by fitting the bottom spring in, ensuring that the tab on the rubber is on the outer part of the arm. And then holding that in place, I fit the top spring. Now, it's very important to make sure that the spring is sitting as straight as possible once the arm is raised. So place your jack stand back underneath the lower arm and gradually raise it up. And as you're doing this, ensure that the spring is sitting pretty straight, so you may have to adjust the top seat for it to sit level. Once you've raised the lower arm up, you can, oh, hit my head on the camera. You can put the bolts back in, one for the shock, which is quite easy, and one for the inner part of the arm, which may need a bit of persuasion. So now that the bolts are in, I can torque them both up. It's very important to remember when you're tightening these bolts up, you have to have the lower arm in its natural position when the car is on the floor. So we put this under load by jacking up the gearbox stand underneath. So with all four corners fitted and complete, it's time to put the wheels back onto the car and bring it down onto the floor.
Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you liked the video, please remember to smash that like button, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel. If you want to join the conversation, please drop a comment below and we'll try our best to respond to you. If you want to watch more of this project, you can do so over here. If you want to watch what YouTube thinks you might like from our other content, you can do so over here.